Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. David Ewing of Local Authority Building Control. So would you ask Mr. Ewing to come back in, please? Good morning, Mr. Ewing. Please sit down, yes, and make yourself comfortable. All right, well, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, now I want to pick up the K15 story again in August 2014. And just to recap as to what the LABC and what you knew by this time, it's right, isn't it, that you knew by this time that the registered detailed certificate from K15 was being relied on by specialist contractors for projects as proof of compliance with approved document B and BR 135, as it had been informed of that fact by way of the email from Mr. Everett of Euroclad, yes?
Yes.
And we know that you were also aware of the concerns which had been raised by Mr. Brian Martin at DCLG and Steve Evans of the NHBC, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And you were also aware, because Mr. Evans referred to it in his email in July 2014, that the BBA certificate on which the LABC and Herefordshire Council had relied and based its work had been revised in December 2013. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I was.
Now, in those circumstances, can you explain to us how it came about that the LABC then reissued the K15 registered details certificate in August 2014 with a certificate stated to last until October 2014 based on the old BBA certificate from 2008?
I can't, other than an oversight.
An oversight.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's look at some of the correspondence that surrounds that decision. If we go to LABC 301841, here's an email from Mr. Brennan to Mr. Ball at Kingspan on the 21st of August 2014, and you are copied in. Subject is the LABC registered details for Kingspan K15, and we can see there's some attachments which will come in a moment. And he says, "Good afternoon, Dan. Further to your correspondence with David Ewing, I can confirm that the cost for the annual renewal and reassessment of Kingspan K15 rain screen board to cover additional fire testing and lower lambda thermal properties will be $1,200 plus VAT. If you wish to proceed, please let me know, and I'll arrange for another invoice to be issued for £850 plus VAT." And then there's a previous invoice that's been issued. And he says, I have attached revised certificates noting a new expiry date for your current registration of the 31st of October 2014. This should allow us all enough time to get the renewal and reassessment sorted. So that's his email to Kingspan. And then the certificate appears at LA, if we can go to LABC 301843. That's the certificate we can see with those dates on, 21st of August, valid until the 31st of October 2014. And the drawing and document list that he attached to the email appears at LABC 301842. And we can see on page 1 that 3 documents are listed as supporting documentation, and those are the Herefordshire Council type approval summary, which we've looked at a number of times, which said K15 can be considered a material of limited combustibility, Kingspan's marketing literature, and there we see the third document, the 2008 BBA certificate. Now, can you help first as to why the Herefordshire Council type approval summary is listed there as a relevant document, given that we know that was inaccurate?
I can't. It's basically it's a reissue of the 2013 document, and I should have checked that through. It's bringing the information through from the 2013 document, and I should have checked that.
Yes.
And I haven't.
But given the warnings you've had up to this point, including indirectly from Brian Martin of MHCLG, NHBC warning, Euroclad, why didn't you check this certificate very carefully?
It was really because I was trying to introduce the next, I suppose, generation of the registered detail with the scope and limitations on it. We'd spoken to Kingspan and knew that they were providing or going to provide us with additional classification reports for 8414 tests that they'd had carried out on systems. So I think it was the fact that I knew that was coming. I've taken my eye off the ball with this, and I can't say anything more than that. You know, I wish I hadn't. It jumps out at you when it's stirring you here, but at the time, it was caught up with everything else I was doing within my day job.
Yes. I understand you're focused, you say, on trying to look at what the next issue of the certificate and supporting information might look like. But why not make sure that nothing else goes out in the meantime and there is no valid certificate until you've done that work?
Well, I think the 3-month extension of that certificate was purely to try and give time for them to come back to us with additional classification reports, rather than just shut it off at that particular point. And I know in light of everything that's gone off since, that was, I suppose, foolhardy. But at the time, I genuinely believed that Kingspan were working with us, were providing us with classification reports of systems that were going to, let's say, provide a much tighter registered detail after that.
Does it come down to this, that you trusted Kingspan at the time and you couldn't countenance that there might be inaccurate information about K15?
I'm still struggling to come to terms with that, quite honestly.
But is it because you simply trusted Kingspan?
Yes, this was a market leader. I had no reason to think that this was anything other than true and honest. There wasn't an ulterior motive behind it.
Yeah. We can also see there that the BBA certificate dated October 2008 is still referenced. Can you explain that?
No, as I've just said, it's an oversight, and I should have picked that up. I think it's just brought the information through from as it was, but I should have gone in and checked that out, and I didn't.
Do you remember carefully going through the concerns that had been raised by Mr. Martin and the NHBC, working through all the points and making sure you understood them before you came to be producing further certificates for the K15 product? Yes, I remember the emails. I was very well aware of the situation with the new Agrimon certificate. And I think I was just genuinely trying to create something better and missed the point that we'd got an extra 3 months on the old certificate. Right, yes. And we can see, if we go to page 2 of this document, that we've still got Appendix A, which, as we saw last Thursday, was verbatim the precise text that Kingspan had asked to be included in the certificate, including point 3, the product can be used on buildings with stories greater than 18 metres from ground level, provided it's used in combination with suitably non-combustible substrates and ancillary components. And also over the page at page 3, the drawings, the diagrams showing test build-ups, which there was no evidence for, was there, at this point? No. And that was a clear failure on your part to pick all of that up, wasn't it? It was, yes. Now, the registered details, terms and conditions, if we briefly look at those, LABC 301020. These are the LABC registered details, terms and conditions. And for the transcript, we can see this document was sent to Mr. Mills at Kingspan when he first registered with the registered details scheme for K15. It was issued to him on the 28th of August 2013. For the transcript, the references are LABC 400999. And if we go to page 2 of this document, and if we look at the third paragraph down on that left-hand column, we can see it says all payments covering the registration process are non-refundable. Similarly, if through usage, unforeseen problems arise with the design, system or solution, or the performance is not as predicted, then LABC reserves the right to suspend or cancel a registration without refunding payments. And then it carries on. Were you aware of that term in these registered details, terms and conditions at the time in August 2014?
I was, yes, and that's really why there was the 3-month extension on the registered detail rather than a renewal for a following year. We knew that we had to change the process, so set a date and a time for them to come back to us with more information. And of course, this is a two-way process here. Kingspan at any time could have come back to us and highlighted issues and chose not to. But it's for me to pick that up from my side.
Yes, but I appreciate you saying you've only renewed it for a few months rather than a year, but why not just not renew it at all? Did you have these terms and conditions in mind at the time?
Well, I think that comes from in Mr. Evans' email. The comment was that there was no reason to suggest that things may not be right in terms of the risk-based side of it, and it was just I didn't know what we know now, and that was all. It was from my side, I was trying to be fair to Kingspan, rather than just say that's it. We've got to the end of this date. We said we extended it for 3 months because they were already offering to provide us with this information to update the registered details scope and limitations.
Yes, but you knew they didn't have the test evidence to support the claims they were making, yes?
No, I didn't. I mean, from their perspective, they were having a lot more tests undertaken in terms of being done. That was from my conversations, and I think a lot of this is over the telephone to Dan Ball. But they were saying that yes, they're getting classification reports through for a series of tests. Now that still wouldn't have allowed them to ultimately to build anything above 18 metres, but it would have extended it from a single classification report.
Yes, I appreciate Kingspan are telling you they're getting more testing done, but you didn't have that test evidence, did you?
No, sorry,
it wasn't in your possession.
No.
So you didn't have test evidence supporting the statements that were being made on these certificates, did you?
They hadn't been backed up, no. And I think that follows in a few of the email conversations I've had with our internal staff as well.
Yes. So what I'm seeking to understand is why was this really a question about fairness to Kingspan and not a question about doing the proper thing and making sure that you weren't putting out a certificate supporting the use of a product in a configuration for which it had no test evidence to support it?
I can't answer that question because it seems foolhardy now. At the time, it seemed reasonable to give them that extension of time.
Yeah. Now, carrying on with the correspondence leading up to the certificate being issued, if we go to LABC 302665, there's an email from Mr. Brennan to Mr. Lee, and on the 17th of July 2014, he says, "Hi, invoice for this one attached. You can tell him that we will have a look at the additional testing if he sends it through to David and copies me in. He needs to do that ASAP, though, as Tim is looking at this one in the next few days." And just be aware, that's the 17th of July 2014. The friendly warning email gets passed on to you via Mr. Turner on the 15th of July 2014. So this is all happening at the same time. And then if we go to LABC 302666, also on the 17th of July, Mr. Lee emailed Mr. Ball saying, please find attached the invoice for the LABC annual renewal. Can you kindly forward on the testing, which you would like to have referenced on the renewal certificates, to David Ewing, copy in my colleague Mr. Brennan for them to review ASAP. And then on the 22nd of July, if we look at LABC 4088877, Mr. Ball replies to Mr. Ball sends to you and Mr. Brennan an email copying in Mr. Lee. Good morning, both. The testing we wanted to include in the renewal is the fact that we have recently had a successful BS 8414 Part 2 test on the K15. We aren't in receipt of any documentation from the BRE yet, though. We would anticipate receiving this in the next few weeks. If you can let me know if this timeframe would be okay, and that we will be able to include the reference to the testing in the certificate. And then if we go to LABC 302679, at the bottom of page 1, you respond to Mr. Ball's email on the 22nd of July 2014, and you say, hi Dan, was looking to talk to you regarding this at our meeting on Friday when we can discuss timescales, etc. Regards, David. And then just for the transcript, there's another email from Mr. Ball at LABC 302676 where he says, thanks David, looking forward to it. And then we can see a further email if we go to the second email down, yes, on this page here. Mr. Ball, on the 23rd of July 2014, says to you, David, just to say before Friday, we would like to perhaps get a quote for all the products we do. Of course, then, if the price is right, we can look to have the entire portfolio with LABC certificates. I will address the form you sent me so we have a base to start from on Friday. I don't know if having all products done at once is realistic, but we can discuss Friday. Many thanks, David. And then you respond at the top of the page. Not a problem, Dan. I just need a list and a few hours to work out the best price for you. I will also need to speak to authorities as well to ensure we can deal with everything within reasonable timescales. And then, is it right that you met with Kingspan that Friday? That would have been on the 25th of July 2014. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Do you remember that meeting with Kingspan?
I remember the meeting, but not the date.
Where did it take place? Was it at Kingspan's
at their
offices?
Yes.
Yes. And what did you discuss at that meeting? Can you help us?
Well, in relation to K15, it was the progress on the testing that we're having carried out. I think that may well have been why the date was extended, because they knew something was coming through. So I was, and I know it's the wrong way around. It was an extension on the K15 certificate, and then the additional conversation was around the installation products that they had, and looking for register details for their thermal performance.
And can you remember the balance of the meeting? Was most of it spent talking about all the other products they wanted to put through the registered details scheme, or was most of it spent discussing K15 and the testing that was imminent?
I can't remember. I remember, and again, this I can remember feeling quite sorry for Kingspan, and that's hurting me to say that now. On the basis that the system tests, I was asking them why other companies weren't contributing towards the cost of having the testing done. As a system, I would have thought a cladding manufacturer or a fixing rail company may well chip in with the costs of having the tests done. And I couldn't see. I thought it was a little unfair that Kingspan were burdening the cost of all of those testing. And here we are today, knowing what we know.
Did you discuss anything about the friendly warning email from Mr. Martin with Kingspan?
Not specifically, I don't think, other than but the discussion was around that we have to, because the changes to the Agreement certificate, the only way the registered detail can proceed was with a full list of classification reports and documents that we would tie to the details. So that would be the detail would cover those specific classification reports.
Did you discuss the fact that previous LABC certificates had erroneously indicated that K15 could be considered a material of limited combustibility?
I don't believe I did, no.
Why not?
I don't know. It was the change to the Agreement certificate, which was the primary driver from my side at the time.
But why didn't you say to Kingspan, we've realised that there's been a major error with your product. We've been saying can be considered a material of limited combustibility. It can't. How did you allow that to go out into the public domain? Did you have that conversation with them?
I wish I had.
Did you ask them why they'd submitted, in support of their registered details certificate, the BBA certificate from 2008 and not the one from December 2013?
No.
Why not?
I don't know if I was aware of it at that time, in terms of the information coming through.
Well, you must have been aware of it because you were told that by Mr. Evans on the 15th of July 2014, just 10 days before you have this meeting on the 25th of July 2014.
Sorry, what I meant there was in relation, I wasn't, in terms of Kingspan sending through the 2013 Agreement certificate. I mean, the conversation centred around that Agreement certificate.
And you tell us, and it's similar to the statement, the evidence you've just given, you say at paragraph 52.7 on page 37 of your witness statement that at that stage LABC had no reason to doubt the integrity of Kingspan, who were the leading player in the market. But how does that not take into account the warning that you've had through Mr. Martin and then the email from Mr. Evans? You did have some reason to doubt Kingspan's integrity, didn't you?
Yes, I think there was. Again, it was. It was about. I suppose I still, sitting at that stage, coming to terms with the fact that things weren't as they appeared. And I suppose that comes in terms of my other role within registered details. You know, I would be quite frequently meeting up with companies who wanted to get a product onto the registered detail scheme that had no test data whatsoever, any likelihood of getting onto registered details. You know, in terms of let's say Chinese product testing or Russian product testing that had to be equated back to European standards. Kingspan were market leaders that I genuinely thought that these guys were in there trying to raise the bar all the time.
It is part of the reason why you were so benevolent towards Kingspan, that you needed their work, you wanted their endorsement of the registered details scheme as market leader.
I think there was certainly a bit of kudos to having Kingspan products there. We had Rockwell at the time, with Celetex were there. We had a lot of multi-foil insulation companies that were looking at registered details at that time as well. So it was a growing library, I suppose, of products that building control officers would refer to as part of their check, which to my mind would make local authority building control officers more competitive in their role, competing against the private sector.
Yes. So there was that kudos element, and also there was a real financial benefit to LABC, wasn't there, in terms of what Kingspan was suggesting at this meeting about pushing all of its product range through the registered details process?
Well, I mean, in terms of the financial side of it, I don't think the finance was ever significant amounts of money compared to the amounts of monies that were being paid out going to have testing done at test houses. You know, the costs within that were paid out to local authorities to backfill posts. There was very little in terms of any profits that had been made out of doing the whole venture, really.
But isn't it the case that actually this potential money was very significant to the LABC itself in terms of its own financial position?
I genuinely don't believe it was. I think that the kudos with working with major companies was probably more important than the financial side. And it's never been. If we were looking at it from a financial perspective, we would be charging an awful lot more for the registered detail facility.
Well, let's look at some more emails on this topic. So after your meeting, if we go to LABC 302686. If we can go to the bottom of page 1 at 1747. So on the 25th of July at 1747, so quite late in the day, you email a number of others and you say, "Hi, got back from Hereford 10 minutes ago, but thought you might like to know I've been asked to quote for 7 products over 3 product ranges and a quote for their entire range of 30 products over 6 their product ranges of Cooltherm 12, Therma 13, Optim R, 2 types of cavity closer and their tech panel. The one thing they did like was my explanation of the briefing note we create that advises BCO's building control officers of what to look for at submission and on site, so becoming eyes on the ground for them. I also asked if they felt having their product linked to the constructive details compliance diagrams would be an advantage, and again thought that this would be another route to ensure correct specification and installation. Might have to do this one before I get back into the template updates, ! Have a good weekend, David." So that's what you're telling your colleagues at that point. There's no mention of the further testing they're doing, is there? It's all about, I've been asked to quote for lots of Kingspan products.
Yes.
And then we can see, sorry, before we go to that, you talk about the constructive details compliance diagrams, which Kingspan's product would potentially be linked to. Can you explain why Kingspan considered this would be another route to ensure correct specification and installation? Can you help with that?
I've been involved with a steering group led by Zero Carbon Hub, which was on effectively the thermal efficiency of new homes. The steering group that I was involved with was on products and materials, and at the time, in terms of thermal compliance, the questions as to whether it was called design versus as built. So on paper, we had buildings that were performing in terms of new housing. When they were being built and being tested post completion, there was a significant difference in the heating or the energy costs compared to the designed energy costs. And one of the things that we were trying to do was an initiative which was registered construction details, which is another part of Consult, which offered specific junction details. And so where thermal bridging occurs, which is at junctions with floors and walls and around windows, that's where most gains can be made by building it properly. It's one of the reasons why government changed Approved Document L in 2013, I believe, to go back to what was called a fabric first approach.
Yes, and so Kingspan were interested in having their product linked to these constructive details compliance diagrams as well, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then we see one email up on the 25th of July 2014 at 15:51. We can see Lorna Stimpson responds to you, copying in Mr. Brennan, and she simply says, "Fan bloody tastic," and then a number of exclamation marks. So she was pretty pleased, yes?
And again, I think that was on I suppose on 2 sides. One was extending the Kingspan range in terms of registered details. Secondly, it was about industry working together in terms of the registered construction details. We already had a partnership there with the Concrete Block Association in terms of block products. To bring insulation products into it again meant that instead of going from a generic, what was called a psi value in terms of the leakage around the joints, you could do bespoke calculations when you knew the particular products that were being used. So for house builders and for building generally, it meant that you can have a better outcome for your construction process.
Yes. And then Mr. Brennan responds to this email at the top of the page at 6 o'clock. Sorry, Mr. Brennan's email is one email down, sorry. There we go, at 6 o'clock. And he says this: "We'll save this failing company yet!" exclamation mark. "Seriously though, that's really great news. Well done, smiley face. Have a lovely weekend. C." Do you see that there?
Yes.
Why did Mr. Brennan state, "We'll save this failing company yet"?
It was purely on the relation that we were never making any money out of doing register details, because the charges that we charged were nothing that was making significant amount of money, and that was a moot point. It wasn't. I think I said on Thursday, the whole drive for registered details was quality, not quantity. And whilst we're talking around failures in the registered detail documentation, it was there to try and provide more information, and there's nothing more than that.
Was LABC in financial difficulty at this time?
No, I don't believe it was.
So can you explain why he says we'll save this failing company yet? I mean, it sounds like this potential work of registered details for all of Kingspan's products was going to be pretty significant for the company, not just for the registered details reputation, but for the company as a whole. Do you agree?
From a personal perspective, no, I don't. That's a bit of humour. That's all.
I see. So it's just humour, and there was no substance to that comment.
No, the costs, if you like, the registered detail costs were intended to cover the salary costs of the staff that were working within the registered details team. That was myself, Cahal, and it was Samantha Lee Muller. That was the three of us in terms of salary costs, plus whatever the on-costs were for that part of the team. And that's what we're trying to do from the point of view of registered details. But I don't believe I've ever been told that I had a budget to achieve or an amount to bring in to keep the three of us working on that role.
Yes. You see, one of the things that's puzzling is that at the very moment when you've been made aware of some pretty serious concerns about Kingspan's statements over its K15 product, as opposed to having serious conversations with Kingspan about those problems, you appear to be having mainly conversations about extra work for Kingspan at that very moment. That's puzzling. Do you accept, looking at it now?
In terms of the emails that you show me, I accept what you're saying, but from my perspective, that was never the case. I suppose we could argue that we're Kingspan sweetening us up by offering us the additional work, and that might well have been the case to try and take some pressure off the fire testing side of it. But I suppose naively, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Looking back now and knowing what you know and seeing what you've seen in these emails and remembering that meeting, do you think you were played by Kingspan?
I think we were played all the way along, both Kingspan and Celetex.
Yes. Now, on the 1st of August 2014, you send Mr. Ball an email. Let's go to that at LABC 302688. So you say to Mr. Ball of Kingspan, 1st of August 2014, "Hi Dan, thanks for the meeting last Friday. It was really useful to meet up with yourself and Ivor." So you met Mr. Meredith as well at that time, yes?
I must have done, but I say I haven't seen him. I have no recollection of meeting him.
Right. And then you say, "You were going to forward a full list of products to allow me to quote against. I've had a go from the notes I took on the day. Can you confirm if this is correct and I could generate some figures for you? Have a good weekend. Regards, David." I mean, there's nothing in there about where's your further testing for K15, is there?
No, there isn't.
And then on the 5th of August, if we go to LABC 308503, On the 5th of August, you send an email to Mr. Brennan and you say, "Hi, I've been playing around with this all morning trying to get some form of consistency. What do you think? If I'm breaking it down further, then I think we need to include a percentage for admin out of LABSS and warranty income, e.g. 3% of the 18%, leaving 15% direct income. It could also be argued that the LABSS will have a greater input, as it will be necessary to recheck all of the thermal calcs for their 0.15. Yours, scratchingheadallday.com, David Ewing." Now, just help us with some of what's in there. When you say we need to include a percentage for admin out of LABSS, what's that referring to?
LABSS stands for Local Authority Building Standards Scotland, and warranty income is LABC warranty. What we were doing is extending the scope of the registered detail to include both warranty approval and compliance with Scottish regulations or Scottish building standards. So at the time we were undertaking that work for Scotland, they would then check it with their own officers, so there was an administrative role in terms of that transfer of documents to and from, as there was with LABC warranty. And LABC warranty was run by a company called MDIS Insurance. MDIS had a warranty package, or packet if you like, which was based around warranty work undertaken on local authority building control sites. And that was in competition to NHBC, and indeed MDIS also had another building control or approved inspector and warranty service run by Premier Guarantee.
Yes. And was it being proposed that warranty would be relying upon your statements in relation to the K15 product going forward?
Warranty would see the documentation that we have, and they would provide their own commentary around that. If we're going to go on to the later registered details, the numbers that are there, so the 165 number became EW, which stood for England and Wales. EWW was England and Wales and warranty, and EWWS was England, Wales, warranty in Scotland.
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. And then if we go up the email chain, if we look at Mr. Brennan's email to you at the top of page 1, 6th of August, he says this: there was an overhead absorption rate done by Tushar ages ago. Your cost per hour to the company is £45. Sorry, your cost per hour to the company is £45. Lorna's is 52 and mine is 31. This is based on salaries in March 2013, so mine at least will have changed a bit, but gives you an idea. And he goes on, the one thing with Kingspan and companies of that ilk are that they take the same amount of work during the quotation and assessment periods as everyone else, but require little aftercare in comparison to Multifoils, Plumis, Guardian, etc. It'll end up being jobs like this that cover our loss on the others. Can you imagine what Guardian has cost us if we were to work it out? ? Now, pausing there, it does seem like there's a real financial advantage to LABC in relation to this registered details work, because it's going to cover your loss on other projects which are more resource intensive. Isn't that a fair reading of this email?
It certainly reads that way. The reality in this is that there were registered details that were taken on where there was a lot more in terms of that phrase aftercare. It was
yes.
post-registered detail queries that were coming through and everything else, and it was that time element of it. But I don't know that we necessarily overpriced, as it were, to cover the costs of other ones, because we didn't know what they were. We were just working out I think the comment there is in the real world we'd have some sort of floating amount in there that would cover eventualities like that.
Yes, but do you accept, just on the face of it, reading this, it does look like Mr. Brennan is concerned about making sure that jobs like this cover your losses on others. So financial considerations were in Mr. Brennan's mind at this time.
Well, I think it was one of Cahal's roles in terms of the finance side. I mean, yeah. I was in fact the quotation moved to him almost in its entirety later on. It was the initial idea of prices that were involved.
You send a further email on the 6th of August 2014. If we go to this is LABC 308506. And this email is sent to Bob Renton. Is this right? He's a consultant to LABSS.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yes.
And John Gilbert, is he the managing director for insurance?
No, he was the, I suppose, my equivalent at LABC warranty.
Right.
So he was the technical standards.
Yeah.
I'm not sure his technical standards manager. There was his direct boss was a gentleman called Richard Smith.
Yes.
I think he was technical standards manager, and John was involved with the technical documents.
Yes. Richard Smith crops up in some emails later, we'll see. And you tell them this: hi, I recently visited Kingspan, who are looking for 7 of their products to undergo registered details and an option to take all 30 products through. Clearly this is a very big quote, and I have been looking at different ways of discounting commonality through the product ranges. I've grouped them under range, e.g. Cooltherm and Therma, and priced the first as a standard quote, then discounted those behind. Before I put this into a formal quote and copy this to you, I wanted to be sure that you'll be okay with the quantities and the rationale. If you could let me know, I can generate the necessary paperwork. This would be the first of the majors to take up their entire range, and I'm keen to try to get them to take up option 2, but not quite sure of their budget. It would also need a fair amount of work, and whilst I can take on extra research authorities, I'm mindful that this would place a time burden on yourselves, and there is scope to agree a sequenced submission rather than a full drop at the start. This can be negotiated with Kingspan, who I suspect are not in a position to submit all at once anyway. And then you go on and talk about what's on the attached spreadsheet, which we'll come to. So first of all, we can see you're clearly saying that clearly this is a very big quote, yes?
Yes.
You're implying that financially this is significant, yes?
No, it was probably the largest quote that I'd generated because of the number of products that were involved. I can't recall the actual quotation. I don't know if you're coming to that later on.
I think we are coming to that, yes. And you say this would be the first of the majors to take up their entire range. Do you mean major manufacturers like Kingspan?
Yes, it would be. Yes.
And why not tell Mr. Renton and Mr. Gilbert at this time that there had been some significant concerns raised about some of the K15 literature, including some of the literature you put out there, and that you'd had a warning about that from DCLG and from NHBC? Wasn't that information they ought to know about at the same time?
Well, this was predominantly in relation to all their thermal products. It wasn't just K15 on its own. In fact, I think in terms of the quote, and again, I'm sorry, if you have the information to hand, I'm not sure whether K15 is actually included within that quotation.
Yes, but even if it didn't include K15, wasn't that important information they ought to be aware of at this time, in terms of some of the complaints you'd had about what had occurred with Kingspan and statements made about its fire performance?
In terms of your question, yes, but I'm looking at this email here as being, this is predominantly about their thermal products. K15 would be a separate entity to this.
Now, we can also see on the 6th of August there's an email chain between you, Mr. Basson, and Mr. Turner. If we can go to LABC 302690. Now, at the very bottom of the page is Steve Evans' email back to Brian Martin of the 11th of July 2014. The email above that is from Mr. Evans to Mr. Turner and Mr. Basson on the 11th of July 2014. And then we see an email from Mr. Basson to you on the 6th of August at 9:53, copying in Mr. Turner. And Mr. Basson says this to you. Hi, David. Can you look at the email chain below? Also see the text below this, an extract of an email I sent to Barry this morning. We've just chatted and he tells me he thinks you were meeting with Kingspan to discuss this. Have you? And if so, any comments? I'm waiting for Steve Evans to ring me later today with the outcome of the meeting between NHBC and Kingspan on the use of this material in buildings over 18 metres high. And then he's got the email he sent to Barry earlier that morning, which is set out in red. And he says, hi, Barry, I confess I've not responded to this email from Steve. He rang me this morning and is meeting Kingspan at 10 o'clock today to discuss how they're going to prove the material is acceptable across a range of construction types. He thinks they are not going to be able to do this, and so is thinking what will be the next steps, ! As I understand, we have a registered details for this that expires soon, but of course there may be many buildings built other than in accordance with the very restrictive requirement of on a masonry base. We'll ring you in a minute to have a chat. Doug. Now, just pausing there, you said earlier that you'd taken some comfort from Mr. Evans saying in his original email that there wasn't reason to think that buildings were at risk. But you're being told there that Mr. Evans thinks that they're not going to be able to prove that K15 is acceptable across a range of construction types. So you're being warned, aren't you, again, that there are problems about the ongoing certification of K15?
Yes.
Did you discuss this ever with Kingspan? Did you go back to Kingspan and say, well, I understand that you're not going to be able to prove it's acceptable across a range of construction types. We need to talk again.
I think there is an email in the system somewhere, because I recall a response from Dan Ball relating to a complaint which he'd assumed was from NHBC, but I'm not sure about timelines within that. I'm sorry.
Well, let's go to the top of the email chain. We'll keep going with the emails that we can see. If we go to the top of the email chain, we see an email from you on the 6th of August to Mr. Basson, copying in Mr. Turner. And you say, hi both, sorry for the late reply, I've been over in Birmingham today. At my meeting with Kingspan on 25th of July, I was advised that testing to BS 8414 had been undertaken in line with the requirements of BR 135 for materials of limited combustibility and shown to be satisfactory with fire barriers at 3.5 metre centres. We have not been given this test data as yet, as they have not received the final report, so I'm not sure if this is global or for individual specifications. As such, the renewal has not been started as yet, and the registered details remains invalid. I am, however, in the process of providing a dual quote to them, one for 7 products and one for all 30 of their product range, so I'm keen to get them on board, particularly as we could also get them involved with the constructive details and named products with the registered details behind the details. And then you say the new BBA advises under 8.3 that if the specification is detailed as 8.2, then it can be used over 18 metres in height. This is also one of the specifications given in the old 7.5. The old 7.1 wording is the same as the new 8.1, so the definition has not changed its category as low risk and class 0. All that's really changed is the removal of the second specification in the old 8.5. In reality, the new BBA actually gives sanction to one specification, whereas 7.2 only ever recommended seeking advice from the certificate holder over 18 metres. Hopefully, the new testing regime will resolve all concerns. Please let me know if you receive anything else from Steve Evans. I know we have recently assessed a new Celetex product to compete with K15 and wonder if NHBC are being pressed for a decision. Now, if we just take that email in stages, you say in the first, the second paragraph down, that you'd been advised by Kingspan that testing to 8414 had been undertaken in line with the requirements of BR 135 for materials of limited combustibility. Now, can you help us? how does BS 8414 and BR 135 have any relevance at all to whether a product is of limited combustibility?
It should really have said in lieu of materials of limited combustibility. And it's just not written properly.
Did you understand at the time that BR 135 and 8414 testing bore no relation to whether a material was of limited combustibility?
Yes, I've just not expressed it in that sentence. I have pointed out in the last but one paragraph there about the removal of the certificate holder advice over 18 metres as being the significant change in the Agrimod certificate.
Yes.
And from my perspective there, I felt reassured from the meeting with Kingspan that they were going to provide additional classification reports and tests to sanction a wider range of building system or external wall systems that would sit under the registered detail.
Yes. I mean, you do seem quite confused in this email. If we take the next part in that same paragraph, you say, we've not been given this test data yet as they've not received the final report. So I am not sure if this is global or for individual specifications. How did you think that testing to BS 8414 and BR 135 could give some kind of global approval for the product?
All I can think of in that was Mr. Meredith's drive for a global wall system that was there. But again, it doesn't read correctly, and it should just say for individual specific specifications.
Is it possible that at this time you were confused?
I think in terms of that, in terms of my knowledge level, I was having to upskill quickly here. I think if we're going to talk around Celetex later, I took the advice of my peers in passing on information that related to that material's limited combustibility, the email that was there. I didn't understand it. I didn't question it, which is wrong of me when I sent that out. But I knew that I had to find out how the intricacies of the BR 135 classification report actually worked. And I think in sort of July and August, that was the time when my knowledge was starting to increase. I don't think I was aware of the specific ramifications of changes such as a cavity width from 40 millimetres to 60 millimetres, or an insulation product from 65 to 75 mil in relation to that test. I didn't realise that significance. That came later on. That came on during August, September, October, November, in that 5-month period.
Can we agree that it looks from this email like you are still confused about the difference between large-scale testing and testing to confirm limited combustibility, and you are still confused about whether that large-scale testing gives any kind of system-specific approval or global approval?
The way that I've worded that, that's what it appears like. I think, I mean, I'm reading that and I'm annoyed with myself in that I know it should have said in lieu of materials of combustibility. So instead of the linear route that was there. But I've not expressed that, and I have to say that shows confusion from my side of it in sending that email out. I should have been more professional in the wording I was using.
Did it occur to you at the time that you might need some help with making sure you understood all of this properly?
I was talking to my colleagues at LABC in terms of Barry Turner and Doug Basin.
Did Mr. Turner, when you got this email, when he received this email, we can see he's copied in, come back to you and say, David, I think you've got a number of things wrong here. You're obviously not understanding this properly. Did he say that to you?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And you've just said you were discussing it with Mr. Turner. Yeah. So were you having verbal discussions?
I suppose by discussion, I'm sending my wording and my suggestions for how we can improve the register detail through, almost as looking for confirmation that I was doing the right thing, that I was correct in the approach I was taking.
Yes, and nobody corrected you and said you're not correct about some of what you've said in this email. Is that right? No.
Yeah.
But you would have expected Mr. Turner, sorry, let me finish. Would you have expected Mr. Turner to have corrected you if he'd appreciated you got it wrong?
I would have hoped that they would have come back to me, yes.
Yes, thank you. What do you mean by the phrase, you say a few lines from the bottom, hopefully the new testing regime will resolve all concerns. What did you mean by that?
I think within that it was the fact that we would have a library of classification reports. Now, I know that there are 1,001 different ways of constructing an external wall system, but this was the starting block. And certainly by March of 2015, we had, I think there was 6 additional classification reports sitting as an appendix to the registered detail. So the tests were coming through, and we intend to add to those as they were sent through to us. And again, you know, this was, I thought, was with the willing assistance of Kingspan.
Yes. You also say 3 lines from the bottom, please let me know if you receive anything else from Steve Evans. I know we've recently assessed a new Celetex product to compete with K15 and wonder if NHBC are being pressed for a decision. Who did you think NHBC might be being pressed for a decision by?
I'm assuming Celetex were approaching NHBC for the same, for their RS 5000, and wanted to know that their product was going to be acceptable on buildings in the same way that Kingspan K15 had been permitted previously.
Yes. And we can see you also said in this email that you were keen to get Kingspan on board. Can you explain, was that for the same reasons you've explained already, simply a kudos point or a financial point or both?
It was a kudos.
Now, moving forward, on the 8th of August 2014, if we go to LABC 305598, you send an email to Mr. Brennan and you say this, you say, morning, completed, sorry if we zoom in on the top of it, morning, completed updates attached for inclusion. The Celetex registered detail is still missing the final reports from BRE evidencing that it complies with the fire testing for use over 18 metres. We'll come back to that later. And then you say, this is an important document as we are under scrutiny from NHBC regarding Kingspan K15, which is an equivalent product. We need to hold Celetex certificates back until this has been received. I think Tim is back on Monday, so he might have received them separately to us, despite his email to Celetex before he went on holiday. Now, I'll come back to some more detailed questions about Celetex later today, but for now, just looking at this email, why do you appear to be taking a different approach to Celetex's certificates in terms of waiting for the final reports before it complies? Why not hold back the revised K15 certificate as well, given the concerns which have been raised about K15 and its certification?
I think that was purely in that Celetex was a new registered detail application, whereas K15 had already been approved since 2009.
But why were they in any different position? Neither of them have provided you with the test evidence that you need for the most recent certificates. Why does the fact that there might have been a previous, in fact, erroneous certificate for K15 make any difference to that?
I think it was purely the BRE classification report for Celetex was the final part of the document submission for obtaining approval on the registered detail. The existing K15 detail, they were working towards providing us with additional reports. It was already in existence, so that was the rationale behind the extension through to the October-November time when that lapsed.
But the difficulty is it was in existence for one specific construction and one specific construction only, something which you seem to be having some awareness of based on the last email we just looked at, but you're nevertheless certifying it with steel-framed supports, etc. So they're not fundamentally in any different position to Celetex, are they? They haven't got the test evidence to back up the statements they want to make about the product. That was the reality, wasn't it?
In terms of a simple analogy, yes, it was.
And was the difference that Kingspan were wanting you to get potentially all of its products through the registered details process, so you didn't want to upset them, so you carried on with the extension?
The financial side of it has never figured in anything that I've done.
Well, wasn't the kudos side of that
kudos
really
side
important
of
to
it,
you?
I don't know. I mean, hand on heart, I didn't think it was. I would stand here and say that's never been an issue for me in terms of what's there. But I genuinely don't know in terms of what goes on in the back of your head, whether that's something that played in it. They certainly didn't get that because we were being we had a carrot dangled in front of us for extra work. That's never been the case.
But is it possible that that's why you were prepared to give Kingspan more leeway in the absence of test evidence than you were with Celetex? Sorry,
I was talking over you. If anything, it was the relationship that I had with Dan Ball, which was a lot more positive, from Kingspan, than it was with John Roper from Celetex.
Right, yes. On the 13th of August 2014, we can see an email to Dan Ball that you sent. This is LABC 40967. This is on page 2 of this document at 12:53. And you say, "Hi Dan," and it's about LABC low lambda K15. "Hi Dan, no, I hadn't included it as part of the quotation. The quote is now ready and I've been harassing warranty for a confirmation response so I can get it out to you. As with the other products, the intention was to verify these with both the current and low lambda. Easiest way to do this with the renewal for K15, I will get a revised quote out to cover this, but it won't be much. We can do the renewal for K15 first to get it back onto our system as soon as you have received the fire test reports from BRE. I assume that the NHBC were also happy with the testing undertaken. Dave Jones at Herefordshire can make a start as soon as you're ready to go. I assume you will have seen the recent Celetex product launch of RS5000, intended to compete with K15. I'm sorry that I've not been in a position to advise that registered detail status has been sought. Our certification for this will be appearing on our website soon for the criteria it has been tested against." So just to be clear at this point, you do seem to be expecting fire test reports from the BRE from Kingspan. That's right, yes?
Yes.
And do you know exactly what those fire test reports were that you were expecting?
I think it was confirmation of testing on both a masonry to part 1 and a steel structure to part 2.
Right.
But a number of tests. I think there was more than one coming through.
And then we can see an email from you to Mr. Brennan dated the 13th of August 2014, confirming that the Kingspan quote's ready to go. This is at LABC 308513. So you say, "This is the Kingspan quote ready to go as soon as we get the nod from Richard Smith at his meeting with John tomorrow. We'll let you know if you don't get copied in. Can you just check for mistakes and save to PDF?" And Richard Smith, you referred to him earlier. He was part of LABC warranty, is that right?
That's right, yes.
And what role did he have?
I think it was technical sales manager, but I'm not 100% on that.
And then on the 14th of August, if we go to LABC 302694, we can see you have sent a letter to Kingspan enclosing a quotation for undertaking the LABC registered details certification process. You send 2 quotes, one for 7 Kingspan products and then a second quote for the whole of the Kingspan range of 30 products. And you say that in the first paragraph there. And then page 2, we see the 2 quotes. So the top one is for 7 products. And then the bottom one is for all of their 30 products. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the total amount quoted in the second quote is over £30,000. We make that. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
And it looks like you've carved K15 out at this point because you're going to deal with that separately. Is that right?
Yes, I said it
Yeah.
was just pure, this was the thermal products.
And then you continue to exchange emails with Kingspan in August 2014. And I want to pick those up again on the 20th of August. If we go to LABC 302700, if we look at the second email down on page 1, on the 20th of August 2014 at 10:15, you say, "Hi Dan, sorry I'd been out of the office yesterday and I'm currently in London. Hoped to get the renewal out to you yesterday but had not factored it was a whole office meeting yesterday rather than management team. So the staff who would have sent out the renewal were with me at the meeting. Can you advise when you're likely to receive the new test data, even if it is in a draft format? Unfortunately, I will need to add in the reassessment cost for K15 for the new fire test reports and existing and low lambda thermal properties. To clarify, both the existing and low lambda products have been accounted for on the other quotations as well. Hope this makes sense." And then Dan Ball responds at the top of the page. He says this: "Thanks, David. So we have quotes for new certs with reference to lower lambda, cool therm, etc. But the renewal invoice we were sent for K15 is no longer valid. If you can send a new invoice for K15 as soon as possible, although if you need the test data before this can be done then, we will have to wait. We don't know if the honest answer we are still hoping with in the next couple of weeks, David. If we need to wait until that is in for the new invoice to be produced, then that's fine, just let me know. We just didn't want anything to lapse in the meantime, what the Kingspan being due for renewal. Many thanks, Dan Ball." So he's made it clear in the middle of that paragraph. He's saying if you need the test data before this can be done, then we'll have to wait. Then he says, we don't know if the honest answer we are still hoping with in the next couple of weeks. So it looks like he's unclear when he'll be able to get any further test evidence to you. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And then on the 21st of August 2014, Mr. Brennan sends an email to Mr. Ball. This is at LABC 302701. He says, "Good afternoon, Dan. Further to your correspondence with David Ewing, I can confirm that the cost for the annual renewing and reassessment of Kingspan to cover the additional fire testing and lower lambda or thermal properties will be $1,200 plus VAT. If you wish to proceed, please let me know. Arrange for another invoice to be issued. I've attached revised certificates noting a new expiry date for your current registration of the 31st of October 2014. This should allow us all enough time to get the renewal and reassessment sorted." Now, who was it who actually made the decision to renew the registration till the 31st of October 2014?
To extend it to October.
Who made that decision?
I'm assuming it was me, but I can't recall ever saying that within emails, but I'd take responsibility for that.
And no test evidence supporting the use of K15 over 18 metres in structures other than masonry ones had been provided to the LABC when that renewal took place.
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
And I think that was purely in the fact, again, we've been promised that these classification reports come in. It was almost to run the RD so that it ran seamlessly through, and we thought it would be in by 31st of October, which I don't believe they still, because the certificate was invalid through to the following March, I believe, from the end of November.
From the correspondence we've seen, would it be fair to say that the LABC did treat Kingspan preferentially at this time?
From the evidence you're showing, it certainly looks like that, and I think that was purely down to, like I say, to relationships. I like Dan Ball. He was an affable fellow.
Now, let's look at some correspondence after that registered details certificate was renewed and extended in August 2014. If we go to LABC 302702, and I want to go to page 3 in the middle of the page. Mr. Ball says this to Mr. Brennan, copying you in. Thank you very much for extending the date. That's great. Once we have the test data through, I will send it all over, but I've noticed an error in the attached. It states that K15 can be used over 18 metres in height if there's a non-combustible substrate. This is no longer the case. The new test data that we are waiting on was done with a Class 0 CP board as the substrate, and therefore it no longer has to be non-combustible substrate. This is the main achievement that we're keen to communicate. And then on receipt of this email, Mr. Brennan emails you at the top of page 3 on the 21st of August at 16:28. And Mr. Brennan says to you, am I missing something, or do they want us to back up their new test report before we see it? And then you respond on page 2 on the same day at 16:58, just a few minutes later, and you say this: yep, you've got it. They are on a bit of a sticky wicket because the BBA was revised, I think, to reflect NHBC concerns that there was only a 25mm cavity between board and rain screen. Celetex is 50mm, and I think this is the testing Kingspan are having done at the moment. It seems to be fine for retrofit to the usual brick outside leaf, but not for new build with differing materials behind it. This has not been accepted on some sites, despite being the only product on the market at the time with any sort of testing to it for that situation. Now, on what basis had you understood that the reason for the revision to the BBA certificate was to reflect concerns by the NHBC that there was only a 25mm cavity between board and rain screen?
I don't quite understand that sentence, if I'm truthful.
No, it doesn't make any sense, does it?
No.
Given what we knew the NHBC's concerns were about a lack of test evidence to support anything other than one specific configuration.
I think, is it possible to see the text below, if there's mention of the 25mm cavity cavity between the board and the rain screen?
Let's look at the email below this. Is there an email below?
I certainly wasn't trying to infer that the BBA was revised because of NHBC concerns.
Well, I tell you what, we'll come back to that. We'll have a look whether there's any other context to that cavity point. But it's puzzling because the NHBC concerns were not limited to that, were they?
No.
And the reason the BBA certificate was revised, or the revisions to the BBA certificate, were not just to reflect a difference in terms of the size of the cavity, were they?
No.
No.
There was an additional 8414 Part 2 test included on the new agreement certificate, on the 2013 agreement certificate. So I don't know whether that relates to the cavity dimension on that.
Well, it's about it being a fundamentally different test with a steel frame system rather than a masonry system, not about the difference between the cavity widths. If we go up the page, Mr. Brennan asks if he should respond to this email on the top of page 2, and then at the bottom of page 1, at 17:19 on the 21st of August, you say this: will you send me what you sent him? I assume it's the limitations he's querying. In reality, we can't issue certification on something we haven't verified, and this one is iffy until they can produce the test data. I can hear NHBC whinging now if we extend the current certificate. I will respond to him separately and copy you in. That way you can spend some time at the window. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, can you just explain why did you say it's iffy until they can produce the test data?
It was purely the lack of information. They couldn't justify that without the classification report being provided for it.
Yes. And you say, I can hear NHBC whinging now if we extend the current certificate, but we know that you did extend the certificate on the 21st of August 2014.
Yes.
On this same day. So you clearly knew at the time that might provoke consternation on the part of the NHBC, yes?
Well, it was not so much direct communication between NHBC and LABC. It was through the Building Control Alliance in terms of the guidance note that was there, and I was trying to work to that. And certainly, we knew that they were updating the original Building Control Guidance Note 18 at that time as well. And I think, again, that sentence is something that I wish I hadn't written. It was internal. It was only ever intended for discussion between myself and Cahal.
But it accurately reflects what was going on, doesn't it? Because NHBC were concerned at this time. They've told you that. And whether those concerns were coming through the BCA and Mr. Turner via NHBC or direct from NHBC direct, you've clearly issued the certificate in the face of NHBC concerns about whether you should do so.
Yes.
Why not adopt a more cautious approach at the time? Why not consider the safety ramifications of extending the certificate without the test evidence for buildings over 18 metres? Did that even come into your mind at this point?
In hindsight, I clearly wish I had. I was trying to, and again, I come back to this statement of trying to be fair to Kingspan, to give them an opportunity to prove it themselves, because I was genuinely believing that a company like that would be able to demonstrate compliance with in all I still can't see how that they would sanction use of their product in a situation that it wasn't suitable for. And by that basis, I've inadvertently done the same thing.
But isn't that the whole purpose of your role, is to give advice to local authority building controls up and down the country as to whether you can accept it? That you're the gatekeeper, aren't you?
Yes.
Can you explain why we see so little, and we'll come to more emails, and we still see so little as we go through, discussing any public safety ramifications of taking this course?
I can't explain it now, other than, we're focused entirely on fire safety here, and I say in hindsight, this is clearly the more important aspect than resolving registered construction details, which was everything that was consuming my day job at that particular time, together with author registered detail work. If I would turn the clock back then, yes, it would have been completely different.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think that might be a good point for the morning break.
Yes, before we break, just help me with this. Are you intending to ask Mr. Ewing any more about the particular circumstances that led him to issue the extension certificate?
I think we're moving on now to what happened shortly after that. So.
And you say that the extension certificate was issued on the 21st of August?
Yes.
Well, then I'll ask a question, if I may. Mr. Ewing, I'm a little uncertain where this email leaves us, because it's sent at 17:19, quite late on in the afternoon, on the 21st of August. At this time, the certificate appears not to have been issued, because you not only refer to it being iffy, but you say you can hear NHBC whinging now if we extend the current certificate. Now, we've been told that, in fact, the current certificate was extended that day, or at least dated that day. What caused you to change your mind and decide you could, and indeed should, issue an extension to the certificate?
I can't recall, unless there's additional threads within the email. I don't know whether it was backdated to the 21st, if that was a date that we promised, and we actually got to the bottom of it. I don't know whether it's a Friday, but I just can't recall. I'm sorry.
Well, I can see the date might have been backdated, but there's obviously been a change of mind, hasn't there?
Yes.
And you can't recall how that came about?
I can't. I'm
Right.
sorry.
All right, thank you very much.
And just to be clear, what we have is an email, if we could just perhaps pull it up, LABC 301841. I took you to it earlier, at the beginning this morning. There's an email from Mr. Brennan at 15:23 to Mr. Ball, copying you in. I can confirm that the cost is this. I have attached revised certificates noting a new expiry date for your current registration of the 31st of October 2014. And then the certificate is at LABC 301843. We bring that up. We can see it's got the date of the 21st of August 2014.
Well, that's, if I may say so, even more puzzling, because that email we've just looked at was copied to you, Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
and it was sent a couple of hours before the email which prompted my question.
Yes.
I just don't understand, really, why you were saying at 5:20 that you couldn't issue a new certificate or an extension certificate without seeing some material when you've been told 2 hours earlier that it had already been issued. Can you shed any light on that?
I'm sorry, I can't. Let's say I'm looking at that. I'm as confused as you are, and I can't offer anything.
Right, thank you very much. Well, we'll have a break now anyway. We'll come back, please, at 20 to 12. And as before, just to remind you, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 20 to 12, please.
Thanks.
Would you ask Mr. Ewing to come back in, please? Okay. Do sit down, Mr. Ewing. Yes, don't wait to be invited. All right, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Green.
Yes, thank you. Yes, if we can move forward then in time with some more emails. If we go to LABC 302703 and we look at the third email down in the middle of page 1, there is an email on the 22nd of August now, a day later, at 9:15, from Mr. Bathen to you and Mr. Turner, and he says, speaking of Kingspan, despite me chasing Steve Evans for an outcome from the supposed crisis meeting with Kingspan on their materials in buildings over 18 metres high, I haven't heard a thing, ! Then one email up, you respond on the 22nd of August. You say this, you say, I was talking to a Celetex rep yesterday and mentioned the new RS 5000 registered detail. He immediately came back with the same question on K15. He mentioned something I hadn't noticed, and that the cavity created for K15 and on the BBA is only 25mm between rain screen and insulation board, whereas the RS 5000 is 40mm. So you appear to have got that from a Celetex rep, is that right? That bit there.
Yes.
And then you say the BBA spec appears to be largely for retrospective fitting onto a non-combustible substrate rather than for new build. Apparently, this is where K15 has been identified up in Manchester on new build, which I assume is being warranted by NHBC. The smaller cavity would also be more beneficial in a fire test. And then you say, I received this yesterday in response to the current limitations on our registered details. And that was you then set out the text of the email we read earlier, which was from Dan Ball, asking for potential changes to be made once you get the new test data that he's waiting on. And you say this is what the awaited testing is intended to verify, but we can't do this until we see the reports. Then Mr. Batten's response is at the top of the page that same day, 9:49, and he says, wasn't this from a meeting in July you attended with Kingspan? I'm surprised, given the potential implications of this, that we're having to wait so long for the test results. Are we, LABC, exposing ourselves here in any way by knowing there may be a problem and waiting for them rather than a general warning or threat of one to our members? Now, what did you understand Mr. Bathen to mean there when he said, are we, LABC, exposing ourselves here in any way and knowing there may be a problem and waiting for them rather than a general warning or threat of one to our members? What did you take that to mean?
It was in relation to the information that was contained on the registered detail.
And did you understand him to be raising concerns about whether, for public safety reasons, a general warning ought to go out to LABC members?
I think it was the fact that there was clearly a problem with the Kingspan product that we, I suppose, NHBC suspected was incorrect in terms of its installation above 18 metres, and clearly should we be doing something for our membership in relation to that information.
Yes, and did you understand that to be because of potential public safety ramifications of not warning members about this problem?
I certainly took that as being an indicator that I had to get the registered detail right when the information came through, but also I recognised that, yes, there was a potential risk there.
And when you say yes, there was a potential risk there, what was the risk that you actually recognised?
Well, I suppose there's several sides to this in terms of the process, and sorry, because I think you asked me the same question on Thursday, and that's been playing at the back of my mind, in that from the NHBC, certainly communications with Steve Evans, Mr. Evans has two hats on there. One is from the perspective of NHBC warranty, and the other is from NHBC Building Control.
Yes, but
looking at from that side, from our side, we're looking at it from the building control element of it, and our business partners LABC Warranty in terms of the risk assessment side, in terms of buildings that they have potentially been seen as signing off. There's a warranty implication there as well.
I see. So are you saying that when you read Mr. Basson's email, you didn't understand him to be raising concerns about the risks to life that there could be in issuing certificates for a product and its use over 18 metres when it didn't have the fire test evidence to support it, but instead to be raising, insurance risks?
No, I think, genuinely, I think from Doug's perspective, I think it was probably both. It was that side of, is there an inaccuracy there, and is there an implication in terms of the structures that have been built that would be under LABC warranty schemes.
And did you understand him to be raising both risks at this time?
I think I focused on the registered detail side and ensuring that the registered detail was going to be correct, and I was trying to work towards that, albeit we're being staggered in relation to the delays on the classification reports coming through.
Right. You say I focused on the registered detail side. What, just the mechanics of getting another certificate up and running?
I think to ensure the accuracy of that registered detail, that it actually reflected what was permissible in terms of what they could do based upon tests that have been undertaken.
In fact, what was the answer to the question posed by Mr. Basson? Did somebody answer it at the time?
I'm not sure, if I'm honest with you. And again, that's not trying to be evasive from my side. That's purely the Doug Basin and Barry Turner were involved with BCA, and
Yes.
in terms of the information route, that is where I would expect all the information to go out through membership is in that and through the technical working groups.
So you expected Mr. Basson and Mr. Turner to take responsibility for this point insofar as there was safety information that needed to go to members, yes?
I was hoping that was the case, yes, as their involvement within BCA, which is the Building Control Alliance, and if that comes through as a series of recommendations, as indeed the guidance note was issued, that it was checked through our technical working group in terms of accuracy. My registered details sat alongside that, or astride it, I suppose, but the communications would go out through the technical team.
You see, the problem is Mr. Turner's told us the opposite of that he wasn't really involved, he was only being copied in for information, and that it was you in charge of the registered details team that he thought would be considering any potential ramifications of this. That was a matter for you. Do you accept that?
I don't know if I do, if I'm being truthful. You know, this was a collective team operation here. There was a specific technical query in relation to the construction of buildings, as well as the accuracy and the ongoing registration of Kingspan K15. And I suppose from my side, I was hoping, I can't say assumed, but I was hoping that end of it would be addressed as a collective through the technical side of it.
Do you actually remember having a discussion with Mr. Turner or Mr. Basson around this time in relation to Mr. Basson's question?
Certainly, I think we had a discussion later in the year when we were all together. Again, one of the problems as a remote worker is that we don't get to see one another very often. Everything is electronic. And certainly that discussion occurred in, I think it might have been December of this year. Okay. But that was as I was developing the registered detail side.
Well, we'll come on to some later events. Were you and Mr. Turner not based in the same building?
No, we have a head office, and occasionally we would meet our paths would cross at the office. Every other event was either at I suppose if there were seminars or conferences that were undertaken, or it was electronic.
So day to day, you were based in entirely different locations?
Yeah, I work from home.
Right. Now, if we go to into September, what we see in the emails is you exchanged some further emails with Mr. Ball of Kingspan in late August and in September. And then if I pick up the chain again, at LABC 302717, on the 12th of September, you email Mr. Ball about the registered details certificate. And so I think that might be further down the page. Just go down the page. There's an email from you to Mr. Ball. Go to page. Yes, sorry, it is that email. So it's the 12th of September, and it's the last paragraph. You can see you say this: with respect to K15, if you are comfortable providing a copy, we can formalise the renewal. If I'm honest, we are receiving some grief regarding the registered detail, and the earlier we can see the report, the sooner we can formalise the certificate. The document would not be made public until you're happy with its content. Hope this is of use. Have a good weekend. So we're in the middle of September now. You haven't received the test evidence. And you say you're receiving some grief regarding the registered detail. Who is giving you grief about the registered detail at this time?
I think it was just genuinely the continuing discussions around NHBC's frustration, I suppose, in trying to get somewhere with Kingspan. It was I suppose so I've lost the timelines in here. I wasn't sure what the date was of this is September, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there was.
So you've extended the certificate.
Yeah. So there was a Celetex rep that had made comments around the difference in testing and whether the thickness of the cavity made any difference in terms of performance. We'd obviously had Clive Everett's email through in the July, so it was really trying to get them to come up with something that we could move forward with them.
And then, but the certificate stayed in place, didn't it? You didn't pull the certificate, you didn't suspend it.
No, because we'd extended it for that 3-month period through to the end of October.
Yeah. And if we now go to LABC 302718 and look at the top of page 2, there's an email from Mr. Basson to you and Mr. Brennan, and he says, "Hi both. I attended a BCA tech panel on Monday where I was asked as to the status of our registered details on this product." And he goes on, "Steve Evans, chair of group, thought it was due to expire at the end of August. There are uncertainties over the suitability of this material to be used as an external cladding over 18 metres above GL." I think that must have been ground level, yes?
Yes.
"And so any extension of our registered details may cause difficulties for us. ! Cheers, Doug Basson." And then you respond at the bottom of page 1. You say this, 12th of September 2014. "Hi Doug, I've been advised today by Kingspan that they have the BRE report on the additional fire testing. It has grammatical errors in it, so have returned it asking for corrections. So I'm hopeful we will have this by the end of next week at the latest." Do you see that?
Yes.
And then Doug Basson replies one email up at 15:35 saying, just a short email, "So are we okay for the registered details bit? As Steve Evans had a similar message but still hasn't seen anything, !" And then you respond above that. You say, "Hi Doug, I've been advised that it is the Class 2 testing that covers new construction and is the most critical. The Class 1 testing that was previously mentioned on the BBA is the one for a non-combustible substrate, although I was talking to someone yesterday who felt this was more stringent as it insulated the void. If we can keep Steve at bay for a few more days, I'm hopeful we will have everything in place to close the matter. Hopefully it might even be available before the President's reception. If not, I'll have to hide in the bogs. Now, why did you need to keep Steve Evans at bay for a few more days rather than ascertaining the appropriate approach to certification of K15 and correcting any previous errors?
I think it was more so we could go back with the next phase. So here's another system that's had testing and a classification report carried out, and whilst that was never intended to be a cover-all, it was the next step forward in terms of getting additional information through.
Why didn't you suspend the registration until you'd received the technical data needed to verify the claims being made in it?
Again, I think it was purely to ensure consistency. We'd extended it through to the October. It was going to lapse at that point. And I suppose everything you're showing me in terms of emails here now is, and in terms of what we know, that those weeks effectively are significant in terms of times that are there. At the time, the risk, whilst it was being raised, we were still not sure the impact of what actually was what was there. And the only people that, again, that sounds like I'm defending, but the only people that knew were Kingspan themselves in terms of the actual performance of their products over that side. We were trying to, in terms of keeping at bay, it was saying, yes, we've had this test, this classification report, this test, this classification report through for these wall systems, so we could see that things were moving forward with Kingspan rather than this delay that's been happening since the start of July.
You talked at the beginning of that answer about ensuring consistency. Consistency of what? Just consistency of the fact you'd always had a K15 certificate, so you were being consistent keeping one there?
Just in terms of rolling it through, yes, so that it stayed live on the system. That was all.
And what was the President's reception that you're referring to there?
Each year, LABC has a president that is appointed, and effectively sets the direction for LABC through that year.
Right. And why would you have to hide in the bogs if it wasn't sorted out? Would the NHBC be at that?
Steve Evans used to work for LABC and had indeed been president of LABC at some point, and is invited on a yearly basis as past president.
Yeah.
So would like to be in attendance at that meeting.
Yeah. So you were anticipating that if you didn't get it sorted out, he would have something to say to you at that reception? Potentially,
there would be a discussion there, yes. And again, it's.
And if we go on within September 2014, if we go to LABC 302720, and the penultimate email on page 1, there's an email from Mr. Brennan to you of the 17th of September at 9:06, just saying, for reference, this is when the amendments were made to the original certificates. No changes were made at renewal. And below that, he'd forwarded to you David Jones's email of 12th of August 2014, where he'd said he'd had no problem with the wording suggested by Kingspan being included in the certificate. And then you go on to say, one email up at 10 o'clock.
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Grange. It may be a mistake that Mr. Jones's email is dated 2013. Perhaps it is a mistake, I don't know.
If we go down below that. Actually, that's right. Sorry, it was 2013. It was before the certificate before that. It was before the 2013 certificate that Mr. Jones was saying, I've got no problem with Kingspan's amendments going in. Do you remember that? Their numbered list, which then appeared in the first registered details certificate.
I believe so.
Sorry, you're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. It was 2013. But then if we follow the email chain back up, you at 10 o'clock on the 17th of September, back onto page 1, you say to Mr. Brennan, just amended the drawings and document list to read how I think it should, Rev B, in the renewal certs in L Drive. Interestingly, Gareth Mills is no longer working with Kingspan either. Why was that interesting that Mr Mills was no longer working with Kingspan?
I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't know who else isn't working there either.
And then you say, I have changed item 3 to read as the new BBA, not the old one, and I think we are relatively watertight with this. Before it goes back up onto the web, can anyone else do this while you are away? I would like to run this by BRE, particularly as they have undertaken the additional testing. Now, at this point, you amended the drawings and document list to refer to the new BBA certificate. So that's the first time you've done that. You can take that from me.
Right.
Can you help us, when had the LABC removed the registered details certificate for K15 from its website, as referred to in this email? You say before it goes back up onto the web. Had it been taken down?
I'm not actually sure on that. I know it certainly wasn't in place between December and March 2015, but I'm not sure what happened, which that would be in the September time, wouldn't it?
For the transcript, we can see an email dated the 24th of September 2014 from you to Sam Lee, where you say Cathal has already taken this off the website short term because of the wording, so it doesn't need to go back, but the new cert will read correctly when it's all loaded for relaunch. Does that help?
Not really. In my head, I've got the certificate. The expiry date was in December.
Yes.
So I can't. I can't recall.
Yeah, we can't see Kingspan ever being informed that the K15 certificate had been removed from the LABC website. Can you help us as to whether they were ever told that?
I can't.
And then moving forward, on the 26th of September, Mr Ball emailed you, LABC 302727. That top email is from Mr Ball to you, 26th of September 2014, and we just need to look at the first line. You say, he says to you, "Hi David, we are very nearly there. We have had a draft doc, but some changes are required, so I will email the K15 info within the next week or so, hopefully, but before the end of October, so the RD registered detail doesn't run out." And he sends a further email to you on the 20th of October 2014. If we look at that, LABC 302746. Looking at the top email on that chain, we're now in October 2014. There's a heading K15 towards the bottom, and he says this: as it's either dealing with the BR135 interpretation with the BRE and BS8414 Part 2, I really am just told it should be any day, but of course I know that you have kindly extended the K15 cover up to the end of October, and I have communicated this to Ivor that we must be able to get this info to you by then for its inclusion. As is always the case when you're in the middle of something but not actually dealing with it directly, it is very frustrating. So I've asked Ivor to send the info directly as soon as he has it from the BRE. Now, those two emails taken together, it certainly appears to be Kingspan's understanding that the certificate was still valid and had been extended to the end of October. Do you agree?
Yes.
So can we agree that even if the LABC website didn't have the certificate on it from late September 2014 onwards, it doesn't look like Kingspan were aware of that, does it?
No, it doesn't. And as I said previously, I'm not sure what the September omission was, whether it was taken down for a while and then put back up again, or whether it didn't reappear between September. But the dates that, as far as I was, or the dates that I thought, it was from December through to March, where there was no valid registered detail on the system.
Now, on the 24th of October, you get another email from Steve Evans. Let's go to that, LABC 302752. I want to look at the bottom of page 1, 1048. Steve Evans says to you, Mr. Basson and Mr. Turner, hi all, what is your availability for a meeting on Monday afternoon next week, either face-to-face or via conference call, please, to discuss some urgent developments around K15? And then if we go to LABC 302761, Mr. Evans, looking at the top of the page first, sends to you and Mr. Turner on the 27th of October 2014 an email, and he says, hi both, ahead of our conference at 3 p.m, please find below my latest emails to Kingspan following discussions last week. And below that is an email from Mr. Evans to Kingspan, to Ivor Meredith and Tony Millichap, copying in others, at the NHBC, dated the 24th of October 2014, and he says this, Dear Tony, further to our ongoing meetings and our most recent conference call on 22nd of October, please find below our comments with regards to the BS 8414 Part 2 test submissions for Kingspan K15. In point 1, he says NHBC has received draft reports and information in relation to fire resistance of K15 insulation product, including the testing for fire performance under both BR 135 and BS 8414 requirements. Our understanding from information received to date is that the indicated performance does not always determine that fire risk has been fully dealt with in building envelope designs, where the specification of cladding, insulation and backing wall materials is significantly different from the facade build-up that has been tested for fire resistance. Our view is that any test specimen should represent, as much as practically possible, the typical construction build-up used for external facades. And then he sets out below that some very detailed observations on the tests that have been carried out. And I'm not going to read all of that out now. And then if we go over to page 2, at the top of that page, there's still more, there's lots of detail about what the build-ups were that were used, what the results show. And if we go down that page, if we can look at the bottom of that page, I want to pick it up where it says, as such. So he says, as such, whilst we are happy to continue our efforts towards reaching an agreed view on what the performance reported from these fire tests truly represent, we request further justification be supplied by your fire engineer on a generic basis as to how the ongoing burning of the cladding materials up the building, as demonstrated in the above tests, can be reconciled against the risks posed by a tall residential building. NHBC have technically engaged in discussions with Kingspan on this issue since 2013. In an email sent to us in December 2013 from Ivor Meredith, we were requested to hold off on advising NHBC customers until opportunity was provided to sit down and go through the body of evidence that could lead to an agreed alternative method of compliance with Kingspan. A significant period of time has now been allowed for this by NHBC. We had a reasonable expectation that you would provide a proactive method statement at Wednesday's conference call, detailing exactly how Kingspan intended to resolve the above matters, but disappointingly that did not occur, which I'm sure you will appreciate now, introduces a very difficult position that cannot be left unresolved. We have now been informed that a recognised expert in fire engineering consultancy has indicated that they cannot positively review the K15 product fire performance data. This has understandably given NHBC cause for real concern, as we were assured quite some time ago that an independent expert's review would be undertaken. We will now review all aspects of this matter and advise you in due course of the actions we intend to take. Should you wish to provide us with any additional information in the interim, we would be pleased to review. So a detailed email from Steve Evans. They're clearly concerned about what the test evidence shows in terms of ongoing burning of the cladding materials as demonstrated in these tests. They're clearly unhappy with the test evidence that they've been provided. They haven't seen anything from a recognised expert, and they're clearly very concerned. That's fair, isn't it?
Yes.
And then on the same day, Mr. Turner emails you. If you go to page 2, sorry, it's a different email string. If you go to LABC 305710 at 11:08, then it's page 2. We see a short email from Mr. Turner to you, just saying, what's NHBC's worry now? Thought this had been sorted. And then you reply on the same day at the bottom of page 1, you say this: "Hi Barry, sorry been up in Rotherham. K15 has been used outside of the scope of installation from the BBA cert, and the recent BRE fire tests have apparently shown that it continued to burn for 20 minutes after a flame was taken away. Steve awaiting an Arup fire engineering report citing its suitability for use as per note in ADB, and deadline for this was the 18th of October, so looks like it has not been received. NHBC unhappy with its use and looking for industry-wide shutdown on acceptance. Will need technical group guidance and eShot to spread message to local authority teams if we are taking a unilateral stance. This, I suspect, is the purpose of the call." Now, how had you come to understand that K15 had been used outside the scope of what was shown in the BBA certificate and was continuing to burn for 20 minutes after a flame was taken away? Was that purely from Mr. Evans' email, or had you had any other discussions with anybody about that?
I believe I met Mr. Evans at a seminar in Birmingham around that time, and he'd mentioned then that there was concern about it whilst we were walking back to the train.
Right.
So that's in terms of the 20-minute side of it.
I see. And can you help us as to what it looks like you're going to have a call, you and Mr. Turner, with the NHBC about this? Steve Evans has sent you this long email in advance of that call. Can you recall what was discussed on that call?
I actually can't recall that. Do you have a date that was taken?
Well, it looks like it's going to be shortly after. He said ahead of our telephone conference at 3 p.m. So it looks like it's going to be perhaps on the 27th of October, 2014. Same day, we think.
And this is at 5 minutes before. I can't actually recall a teleconference, and I think I might be getting confused with the equivalent of Zoom meetings that we're having now.
Yeah.
If it was a telephone call, honestly, I'm sorry, I'm struggling, and I know that's a really important aspect, but I'm struggling to remember the context and the content of the meeting.
Can you remember what position LABC took at that on that call?
Well, the register detail was taken offline after that time. I think the discussion was around, again, because there is warranty implications here and there is building regulation implications. Warranty in terms of warranting the buildings for 10 years post-construction and the risk associated with that.
But there are clearly building regulations concerns raised as well. You've been told it's burning for 20 minutes after a flame was taken away.
In terms of the BR 135 classification report, that's in relation to the material performance. There's a test that undertaken for external fire spread and internal fire spread in terms of the temperatures that are there. Material performance is around the breakdown of the cladding system, and the criteria in terms of spread is that it doesn't exceed the height of the test rig within the 15-minute period that are there. And the purpose of the classification report is to highlight instances where the person that's doing the classification report.
Is that what you thought at the time? Did you think, well, I don't need to worry about that burning for 20 minutes after the flame's taken away because there are criteria that the test needs to comply with? And We'll simply look at that.
This is October time, so I think I was getting up to speed with the intricacies of BR135. The 20 minutes is really alarming in terms of the test that's there, but it was the judgment on a classification report about whether that is significant or not. It mentions it's taking it as a risk-based approach in terms of burning, which is about debris falling down onto people and firefighters as part of a real fire scenario. And I was reliant on the classification report stating whether that product was suitable based upon that additional information that was there.
I see. Mr. Turner responds at the top of page 1. He says, cheers, Dave. We'll phone in now, but not going to say or admit to anything at this stage. Now, so it looks like Mr. Turner was certainly on the call. Did you discuss this with Mr. Turner around this time? Do you remember discussing the issue about burning for 20 minutes after the flame was moved away?
No, I don't. I know that it was discussed later in that year, because I've said previously I sat down with him and Doug and talked around how we were going forward with that. But I can't recall specific conversations, I'm sorry. Okay.
Now, on the 11th of November, if we go to that now, 2014, LABC 302792, we can see Mr. Ball sends you and Mr. Brennan an email. Good afternoon. I have attached the 8414 Part 2 test report. It's a draft, so there are a couple of errors. And then he goes on to give some detail about that and picking it up 3 lines down. If you can reference this in the K15 register detail and reissue, that would be splendid. The current K15 register detail states that the non-combustible substrate must be used over 18 metres. The test report I have attached was successfully passed using a 12mm cement board. So that statement can be removed, and Kingspan have now successfully passed to both BS8414 Part 1 and Part 2 with K15. Many thanks both, and thanks again for extending the registered detail to allow us to get this to you. Do you see those last lines in particular?
Yes.
And then you send this to Mr. Turner. If we go to LABC 302793, on the 11th of November, you say to Mr. Turner, top of this page, hi Barry, just received this. Not going to have a chance to digest it through the day as have 3 meetings up to tea time. We'll need to talk through it at some stage prior to further conversations with Steve Evans. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, do you remember whether those further conversations with Steve Evans actually took place? And if so, what was discussed?
I don't. I know that at that point I was trying to facilitate a meeting with BRE to talk through the tests that had been undertaken, but that didn't happen until February, I think, the following year. But I can't recall anything further with Mr. Evans.
Right. Mr. Turner responds to this email. If we go to LABC 302794, he says at the top of the page, hi Dave, can't download the attachment at the moment and due in a meeting at 2 o'clock, but it seems strange that they are using 12mm board, but the report says 15mm. It seems to me they either need to change their specification or get the report amended. Until then, we only have their word for it that it's a typo. So that was his response.
Yep.
So Mr. Turner does seem to be involved in looking at this new test evidence, yes?
Yes.
And then...
I'm jumping in. That was the content of one of the questions I asked of BRE as well.
Yes, we'll come to you asking the BRE for assistance in a moment. But when the K15 certificate expires at the end of October 2014, the LABC amended the validity date of this to the 30th of November 2014 and changed the wording of the certificate. Do you remember that?
I think so, yes. I know it was the 1st of December when the certificate was no longer valid.
Well, let's look at that certificate at NHB 50798. NHB 50798. Yes, so this is the revised certificate. At page 1, we can see we've got Kingspan Cool Therm K15 rain screen board, and then under description of product, you can see in the final 4 lines it says K15 complies with BR 135 2013 for use in rain screen applications above 18 metres in height. See conditions of certificate for more information. Now, can you explain why that bold statement is there on the front of the certificate? K15, either product, complies with BR 135.
I think it's just intended as a initial summary of the board.
But the product can't comply with that system test, can it?
It should say when used in rain screen applications, see conditions.
Well, no, what it should say is K15 can be used over 18 metres only in the following specific system configurations, and those should be listed, because that's the reality, isn't it, based on the testing.
But does it not say that in the conditions of the certificate on the following page?
I'll come to those, but I want to know why we've got this statement at the beginning of the certificate. K15 complies with BR 135 for use in rain screen applications above 18 metres in height. That's misleading, isn't it?
If I'm honest with you, I prior to sitting and having the question asked of me this morning, I thought that was a fair summary. I recognised the wording inside it, but the fact that it's so detailed within the conditions and scope and limitation, I thought that was adequate in terms of an introduction to what the product is. And with hindsight, we can rewrite it a number of ways, I suppose. But genuinely, I thought that somebody isn't just going to pull that off and not bother reading the rest of the documentation behind it.
But the problem is, as a statement, K15, either product, complies with BR 135. That can't be right, can it? Because a product can't comply with a system test.
No, it can't.
No. At the bottom of the page, it states the certificate was, if we look at the dates, it says the certificate was first issued 28th of August 2013 and is valid till 30th of November 2014. That's where we get this extra 1 month extension from. And then if we go to page 3 of the certificate, about halfway down the page under ADB, we can see it says, note, from the results, it can be considered as a material of limited combustibility and meets the criteria for Class 0 classification for spread of flame. Do you see that?
I do see that, and I'm mortified that is there. But that's page 3. Page 2 is the much more detailed scope and limitations of the document.
Well, that shouldn't be there,
No, it shouldn't be there. That's been dragged through from the original document.
And page 5, if you go to supporting documentation, we've got the Herefordshire Council approval summary, and we've still got the 2008 BBA certificate. Do you see that?
I do. And again, that's been dragged through off the 2013 document.
Yeah.
And holding my head in my hands, quite honestly, on that.
Now let's look at an email now. LABC 40364. This is an email that you sent to Mr. Ewing. Sorry, that you sent to Mr. Brennan on the 8th of October 2014. You just put revised certs. And there are 2 attachments, the K15 product document and the Celetex product document. And if we look at LABC 40365, This is titled certificate number EW165. The content of this certificate appears to be similar to what we just looked at. Can you see it says K15 complies with BR135 for use in rain screen applications above 18 metres in height. See conditions of certificate for more information. Do you see that?
I do.
On page 3, it's still got can be considered a material of limited combustibility.
Yes.
And page 5, it's still got the supporting documentation. So it would appear that you sent this certificate to Mr. Brennan, yes? So you must have looked at this before you sent it, is that correct?
Yes, I must have. No, I wasn't blaming anybody else for the type errors in there. That's down to me to have picked it up. This is the new look registered detail. You'll notice that EW number appears for the first time in EWW. Yeah. So it was trying to put something into context that, and this was over, I think, 300 products we had for registered details. This was adopted for everything. But the Kingspan and the Celetex documents were probably the hardest ones to pull together in terms of that scope and limitations that were part of the second page of this document.
Yes. Now, going forward with the chronology of events, there are a series of emails from Mr. Ball in December 2014 chasing about the registered details certificate for K15. For the transcript, there's one on the 1st of December 2014, that's LABC 302804. There's another one on the 5th of December, LABC 302808. Let's look at another chasing email, LABC 40890. There's an email on the 10th of December. He says there to you and Mr. Brennan, afternoon, gents. I know you had told me that you were having to look at the complaint before issuing the registered details. We do state that K15 has been tested to BS 8414 parts 1 and 2, which means that it can then potentially be used over 18 metres, but we don't state categorically that it is suitable over 18 metres in all build-ups blanket approval. We state that the alternative compliance route that's set out in BR135 and referred to in Part B states that you can either have an insulation material that's at least of limited combustibility in England and Wales, and if it isn't, then you must adhere to the alternative compliance route laid out in BR135, which is to test to BS 8414 parts 1 or 2. I just wanted to send this in case it helps in any way, gents. If when it comes to the wording that will go in this registered detail, you want us to come up with it together, give me a shout. Now, in the first line, he said, I know you told me you were having to look at the complaint before issuing the registered detail. What complaint was that? Can you help us?
That was the discussions with Steve Evans in relation to the performance of the product. And I wasn't, I was trying to keep it as neutral rather than naming. I mean, it would have been nice to have known that both NHBC and LABC were having, certainly NHBC having difficulty getting the test reports out of Kingspan. But that was the context of that comment. Yeah.
Now, on the 10th of December, he emails you again. If we look at LABC 302815, this is the second email down on the page. He says to you, Mr. Brennan, Cathal David, I spoke with Cathal on the phone this afternoon as I had noticed that the case 15 registered detail has gone past the renewal date on the website, so it's gone past the 30th of November, when I checked after I'd emailed earlier, which says valid till 30th of November 2014. This is a concern, really. I know we are waiting for things to be discussed, but can this be extended? So on the site, it shows that the registered detail is valid. I don't know if there's a reason, but when I click on the registered detail on the site, whether it be K15, Optimar or competitors, it says the web page attachment cannot be loaded. I have registered. And then he says, with reference to the K15 renewal, however, I understand that it's all paid for now, and if this could be addressed as a matter of some urgency, and the issue that you told me about yesterday, David, with reference to the email letter you received from the warranty provider, I won't name them, can be sorted out as quickly as possible. Now, is that referring to concerns by NHBC, an NHBC warranty?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah. If I can help in any way, let me know so we can have the registered detail as it should be with reference to the 8414 Part 1 and Part 2 and relevant text. That would be great. As I said in the email earlier, we've always stated that it is dependent on the test criteria, not a blanket approval over 18 metres. If you could let me know how we can move on to rectify this, that would be great. And then if we go to the top of page 1, you didn't respond to Mr. Ball, but you forwarded this to Mr. Turner and Mr. Basson on the 10th of December, and you said to them, "Hi guys, can you advise on any discussions at BCA on Monday in relation to K15? I need to start this off one way or t'other. Regards, David." So is it right that you weren't responding to Mr. Ball because you were waiting to see what had been discussed at the BCA technical group meeting? Is that right?
As far as I can see there, yes. I mean, I know that there was discussions around amending the technical guidance note as well. They're preparing a draft issue for that.
And then if we go on the 11th of December 2014, if we go to LABC 302817, Mr. Basson responds to this email you just sent. It's the second email down on page 1. He says, we discussed yesterday and Steve came clean about the continue to burning discussion we had last Friday, ! They, NHBC, are placing the onus on installers, builders who have used it to prove compliance where it is not strictly in accordance with the BBA certificate conditions of use. The sales director of Kingspan was apparently very bullish when Steve spoke to him last week and has said the responsibility for how it is used is down to the developer, so they are distancing themselves from it. Not sure if Barry has anything further to add. It seems there is no likelihood of Kingspan coming up with the tests that will prove it works in the high-risk situations with combustible constructional details. Cheers, Doug. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So it's clear that Steve Evans is adopting an approach at this point of putting the onus on the developer, but you're told very clearly that there is no likelihood of Kingspan coming up with the test that will prove it works in the high-risk situations with combustible constructional details. What did you understand that to mean at the time?
I believe it was in relation to existing buildings, and NHBC were pressuring Kingspan to demonstrate compliance. From the comments there, Kingspan have said they weren't going to do anything now, despite keeping NHBC at bay, I think, did you say 2013, and placing the onus on the developer to sort it out.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Turner responds to this email at the top of the page. He says this, and he sends it to you and Mr. Basson. I think Doug has summed it up. I came away with the overall opinion that if it is not absolutely in line with the specification indicated on the BBA certificate, then it should not be used. There seems a reluctance on anybody's part, particularly fire engineers, to say otherwise. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it appears that it's occurring to Mr. Turner at this point that you can only sanction the use of K15 if it's absolutely in line with the specification indicated on the BBA certificate. Is that what you understood him to be saying?
In the context of the email there, yes, it's the published tests on the Agrimod certificate.
And was that news to you at the time? Because we saw earlier that you'd been quite confused over whether these tests could confer global approval or just a specific system approval. By this time, were you clear that this test evidence could only support the use of K15 in the specific test configuration that had been part of the build-up?
Yes, I think at December I was up to speed as far as I believe I was up to speed with the requirements of BR135 and the testing that was part of that, and was looking to Kingspan to demonstrate the classification reports for a range of wall systems.
Did it occur to you that you had a problem because LABC had been making statements about the use of K15 more generically than that on its registered detailed certificates?
I was concerned that we needed to be absolutely correct in what we were saying, and certainly I believe that's what the end result was from March 15 and from November 14 with the Celetex certification, that it reflected a small number of scenarios where that registered detail was appropriate. In every other instance, they would have to seek approval either by following the BCA guidance, which at the time included desktop studies, for alternatives to that, or come up with appropriate classification reports.
Yeah. Now, moving forward with the chronology, Dan Ball sends a further email to you and Mr. Brennan on the 11th of December 2014. For the transcript, that's at LABC 302818. And what he says in that email is, can we have the registered details date extended first, and then perhaps a breakdown about what's occurring with reference to the K15 renewal and the addition of the 8414 Part 2 test that they want to add to the certificate. And he says, when it comes to the text, I can assist in drafting something. And what I want to look at is an email that Mr. Brennan then sends immediately to you at LABC 302819. This is on the 11th of December. He says to you, hiya, can we get this K15 thing put to bed? I've had Dan Ball on the phone and emailing yesterday and today, and I've just got off the phone to Ivor. He mentioned that getting the 31k quote signed off by his boss is going to be difficult if this doesn't get sorted now. What is the hold up at our end? Cheers, Cathal. Now, do you remember seeing that email and being told that Kingspan was saying that it's going to be difficult to sign off presumably that's the quote for all of the registered details work?
Yes.
They're saying it's going to be difficult to sign that off if we don't get the K15 thing sorted and put to bed, yes?
Yes.
Did the LABC perceive this as a threat by Kingspan at the time?
Yes.
Did you take any action in response to such a threat? Wasn't that wholly inappropriate on Kingspan's part?
Yes, potentially it was, but the fact that we didn't do anything and didn't jump to the tune, I think, just demonstrates that we weren't that finance-driven. The questions you were asking me earlier, this had to be right. We knew at this point that any registered detail had to be correct when it went out the next time, which wasn't until I think March of 2015.
But why not write back to Kingspan and say it's wholly inappropriate for you to link this K15 certificate with the quotation for all the other registered details work? That's unacceptable.
I think it was purely because it was verbal. I'm not sure we've got something that says it from email. Unless you sort this out, we're going to withdraw. It was a verbal comment, so I don't think we felt it necessary to go back and respond to something that wasn't formalised.
Well, you didn't doubt Mr. Brennan's account that that's what Mr. Meredith had said.
I'm sure it's been said, but we were not jumping to their tune. That was as simple as that.
You respond to this email. If we go to LABC 40878. You say this at the top. Hi, had been waiting for result of BCA meeting on Monday. Seems we are still okay approving the tested data, but need to look at wording to try and tighten it up to avoid deviation. What did you mean by that? Need to look at wording to tighten it up to avoid deviation?
It was quite simply that the explicit specification was followed for any classification report that we had. the question around, I think in that intervening period, was what happens if you modify something slightly? If you change the insulation from 60 mil to 65 mil, does that make a difference in relation to the classification report? How far can, I suppose, developers push that classification report to still use it on a building?
Yes.
And that was all I was trying to do there, was ensure that the registered detail couldn't be extended, if that made sense.
Yes. Did you appreciate that previous LABC certificates had in fact deviated
Yes,
from the relevant test evidence?
absolutely. And that was why, again, I think I mentioned on Thursday that I wanted this registered detail to be meaningful and give building control teams a good direction on what they can accept and what they can information they need to try and sort out if it's not complying with the detail in its entirety.
Yes. Now, there's another email chasing from Mr. Ball on the 15th of December 2014. For the transcript, that's at LABC 302826. And having received that email, Mr. Brennan sent you another email on the 15th of December. If we go to LABC 302827. Mr. Brennan states at the top to you and Mr. Lee, where are we with this one? Are we in danger of losing the large quote, as Ivor said in my conversation with him? So it does appear that Mr. Brennan was concerned about losing that large quote. Do you agree?
Yes.
And you respond on the same day, if we go to LABC 30133676. You say, hi, I've spoken to Dan Ball this morning and explained the delay, awaiting a reply from Barry regarding the collapse of materials as it's not strictly controllable under B4. Gives us a few more days. Has all the tech stuff gone to Hertfordshire as yet? Now, that sentence there, awaiting a reply from Barry regarding the collapse of materials. So was he advising on the technical aspects of this next certificate, given what you'd noted about the potential collapse of materials?
I think that's a follow-on to the earlier email that you brought up, talking around the 20-minute burning of the product,
Yes.
which I'd suggested whether it needs to go through the technical working group and guidance to members.
Yes. And then we can see there's a further chasing email on the 17th of December from Mr. Ball. For the transcript, that's LABC 302828. And on the 18th of December 2014, you email Mr. Turner, LABC 40863. We can go to that. Top of page 2. You say, hi, Barry, I've amended the certificate and highlighted changes in red for ease. If you could consider these and see if they reflect the aims of the amended BCA guidance document, I would be grateful, as I can then go back to Kingspan and also to Celetex. Now, what do you mean by, when you talk about consider these to see if they reflect the aims of the amended BCA guidance document? What are you referring to there?
I think it was more that it adhered to the guidance document. I mean, this was a building control industry-wide guidance document that I wanted to make sure that the registered detail fell into that. So if the specifications weren't followed, they could still, in theory, work to the BCA guidance that was there. And some of the wording, I think, used there in relation to thermosets was brought through from the BCA guidance note as well.
Yes, I see. Now, just on this topic of the BCA, can you just clarify something for us? In the witness statement of Mr. Evans, Steve Evans, to the inquiry, for the transcript, this is paragraph 197J on page 76. He says that you were a member of the BCA technical group. Is that correct?
No.
No. Were you ever a member of that group?
No.
No. Now, if we go to the top of page 1 in this chain, Mr. Turner responds to your invitation to look at the wording, and he says this, hi Dave, everything looks to be covered by the amended wording, almost to the point of it not being possible to meet all the requirements, but that's okay by me. I've one concern over the wording in the product description at the beginning of the document. It states quite categorically that K15 complies with BR 135 for use in rain screen applications above 15 metres in height. While this may be true, and I note that immediately after attention is drawn to the conditions of the certificate, do we have to say it quite so noticeably? I can't help but think that this will be used by Kingspan marketing and will encourage people to read no further. And he says this, can I suggest that the paragraph reads, K15 complies with BR 135 for use in rain screen applications above 18 metres in height. However, see scope and conditions of certificate for more information. And he's added the words in red, yes?
Yes.
Then he says, I'm still nervous, but can't see that we can do any more. Now, did you agree that his wording was an appropriate summary of the position insofar as the above 18 metre height aspect was concerned?
I must have agreed with it in taking his guidance on it. You've already alluded to this in the earlier document in terms of the wording that's there.
Yes.
And I think it was purely because it was intended as a summary, and that the scope, or see the scope and limitations was the real reading material, effectively, that provided an overview. And I still believe that March 15 Kingspan certificate was as tight as we could make it in relation to the classification reports that we'd received.
Well, do you agree, looking at it now, that it still implies global approval of K15 for use above 18 metres, the way it's written there?
I think, looking at it now, yes. I mean, like I say, prior to this afternoon's question, I generally thought that paragraph was okay in that registered detail, and that wasn't for the fact that it's tying it as a product as opposed to a system. It was the fact that we're limiting it, or caveating that note, that it only in relation to the scope and conditions, which are very detailed on the following pages.
But why wasn't it stated instead that Kingspan K15 can be used over 18 metres only when used in specific system configurations that are then identified? Why not do it that way?
It could have been done that way, and I think it actually says that wording on the second page.
Yes, but can we agree that on that front page, which is an important page of the certificate, isn't it? In that summary, it should have been done that way in order to be clear that there was no generic approval being given to K15's use over 18 metres.
Yes, you can agree. I mean, from my side of it, I still believe that everything else in that registered detail, the rest of the text in the scope and limitations, was the rider for that. But as an overview, then I would have to concede if you feel that wording sort of legally doesn't come across.
I'm not just looking at it from a legal perspective, I'm looking at it from the perspective of any construction professional reading that wording.
Well,
can we agree that what it should have said as a summary at the beginning is K15 can only be used over 18 metres in specific system configurations, and then those should have been identified somewhere in the certificate?
Yes, we could, but I would still hope that any professional looking at that would not just take that front paragraph and not bother reading the rest of the document.
Did you discuss this with Mr. Turner separately, aside from this email at the time?
There was discussions around, which is at the start of December, around how I was trying to get the register detail to look and the information that was going to be contained within that. And that was becoming much more explicit in relation to the exact specifications that have been used for the classification reports.
Did you understand why Mr. Turner was saying, I'm still nervous but can't see that we can do any more? Can you help us understand that comment?
Yes, I think it was around the fact that the even with the specification, that people were still trying to push the boundaries of that specification and demonstrating it was okay.
Yeah.
And if it was felt that fire engineers can't justify that on the basis of a desktop review in terms of how that original test may have performed, then that ability to extend the scope of the specification was a potential problem, and that was why the wording was so specific. If it didn't comply with the registered detail, they didn't have to. Well, they followed that. It complied with the workings of the registered detail. If they wanted to do something different, they would have to try and demonstrate it by another means. And it was solely trying to ensure that because it was so specific in terms of I can't see that we can do any more, that here are, I think, 6 classification reports where that's been tested and shown to be in compliance with or meet the performance criteria of BR135. Anything else isn't acceptable.
Did you share Mr. Turner's concern that Kingspan Marketing would use the proposed wording in the LABC certificate to encourage people to read no further, thereby continuing the misleading implication of global approval of use of K15 over 18 metres?
I suppose now I wouldn't put anything past Kingspan. At the time, you know, well, at the time at this point in time, we knew we had to be really tight in terms of the information that we provided, because it drifted, or not drifted, Kingspan's marketing area had reduced because of the initial removal of the buildings over 18 metres contact the certificate holder statement that was on the 2008 Agrimon certificate. And they were now being tasked more and more around, is this product suitable? And I didn't want to be effectively supporting that. I wanted them to know that it was there. I'm mindful I haven't answered your question there, and I can't say that Kingspan wouldn't have taken that opening statement and just put it in. I would like to think that if it was, that we may well have picked that up and gone back to say that they need to read the full certificate to point out what was actually in the contents of the certificate, rather than just that opening statement.
Okay. On the 18th of December, you send an email to Mr. Ball and Mr. Meredith. If we look at that, LABC 40996. You say, hi, Ivor, Dan. Tried to phone today, but I thought I should just clarify some of the issues for you that we've around recertification for K15 and other thermoset materials above 18 metres. And you tell them LABC have been contacted by NHBC in connection with the wording used in the earlier registered detail certificate following the reissue of the BBA certificate in December last year. There was concern that the certificate implied a global approval to the use of K15 above 18 metres, and that the revised certificate had been amended to read suitability for use on non-combustible substrates only, i.e. to masonry or concrete structures. And you say this was subsequently amended and reworded pending the results of your 8414 testing carried out by BRE. This documentation has since been provided by you, and the specific test criteria demonstrated compliance with BR135 in relation to the criteria cited in, and then you've got external fire spread and internal fire spread. However, the test data and photographs showed that there was considerable breakdown of the cladding system and appeared to show continued burning for 19 minutes after the crib was extinguished. A24 mechanical performance states there's no performance criteria for mechanical failure, and the nature of the performance should be considered as part of the overall risk assessment. Now then you carry on, and then you actually end up quoting from the guidance in BR135 at the bottom of that page, and then I want to pick it up again at the bottom of page 1, and you say, this is currently under consideration by the group, and I've sought updates from Barry Turner, Director of Technical Policy at LABC, and our representative at BCA. The issue is fundamentally a warranty issue rather than a building control matter, although there is clearly a duty of care required by building control. I've also suggested that we could include wording within the certificate to read, and then you've put some wording in there. I am, however, mindful that this may still create further issues for approval. Then you go on in the last paragraph over the page and say, I'm sorry it's taken time and overlap with the certificate lapse. Please be assured we're dealing with it as quickly as we can, and I attach a draft revised certificate that I believe covers the situation. And then let me know if you're prepared to accept the wording. Now, I want to ask you in particular, go back to the bottom of page 1. Why do you say this was fundamentally a warranty issue rather than a building control matter?
Because my understanding that was the element in relation to material performance. The external spread and the internal spread on the testing for BR or 8414 testing was around how quickly the product spread over the surface of the fire, which was a B4 issue. The fact that the building falls away, the recognition that windows and downpipes and fascias and things will fall off as fire attacks that external face. But it's about how, in terms of the warranty side of it, it's whether they're prepared to cover the building on the basis of that classification report, so take due regard of that. There's a duty of care from building control to ensure that that product is suitable for use on the building, but I think the overriding decision of whether that's given approval on a warranty the decision as to whether that is approved through warranty purposes is based on the extent of damage on that structure. That's how I understood the mechanical performance requirements.
But did you ever think about the functional requirement under B4 that the exterior wall must adequately resist the spread of flame from one building to another and over its own face?
Yes.
How was the fact that it was continuing to burn for 19 minutes not something that was directly relevant to whether it met that functional requirement?
I believe that it was the first 15 minutes is the key point in the testing on 8414. It's how quickly that product spreads over the surface. The falling debris, it says that there is no pass or fail for it. But the warranty, in terms of whether you're preparing to warrant a building for that with that structure on it, will come. It's a viewpoint from the people providing the warranty.
I see. So are you saying that the public safety implications of the evidence that you had before you simply didn't occur to you and you thought this was an insurance issue?
No, I think there was the fact that there was a duty of care on that, but I would expect the classification, whoever's issuing the classification report, to say whether they felt that product was suitable for use on external facades.
I see. So you thought it was the responsibility of somebody else to tell you in the report if there was a problem with the use of that material over 18 metres, yes?
The person who was writing that BR135 classification report, I would expect them to highlight in that as to whether that wall system, whether they felt that was suitable for use, but report on the mechanical performance in terms of what happened after the initial testing criteria. And if I'm wrong on that, then I've been wrong since 2015.
And you didn't think that you had any kind of independent obligation to think about the test evidence in front of you and look at it in terms of compliance with building regulations and building safety?
I think there was a duty of care from building control to whether they accept that as compliance with building regulations, but there is also a decision from the warranty providers as to whether they're prepared to provide insurance cover for that premise based upon the performance that's mentioned in the classification report.
I see. So that's what you mean when you say, although there's clearly a duty of care required by building control, yes?
Yes.
Did you have any concerns at that point about the many buildings with K15 on them, which would have been authorised by building control officers due to erroneous information on LABC certificates?
Yes, there was concern there, and there'd also been discussions with LABC Warranty, who were our if you like, warranty providers on LABC sites.
Did you discuss whether a warning should be issued about those buildings and projects to your membership to make them aware of the risks and dangers which you were becoming to appreciate?
Well, there was the earlier email to Barry and Doug asking whether this was a matter for technical working group and a notification to membership. I believe we did issue LABC guidance in 2015 around this.
I see. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment for
Yes.
our break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll have a break now, Mr. Ewing, so we can all get some lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock, please. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence over the break. All right? Thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Grange. 2 o'clock, please.
Thanks.